Well, Seymour, I made it, despite your directions.
Ah, Superintendent Chalmers, welcome. I hope you're prepared for an unforgettable luncheon.
Did you have it?
Steamed hams.
Steamed hams.
That's what I call hamburgers.
You call hamburgers steamed hams?
Yes, it's a regional dialect.
Uh-huh. So what region?
Where you from?
Upstate New York?
Really?
You know what they call a quarter pounder with cheese and...
From Utica?
No.
Tell him, Vincent.
Royale with cheese.
Oh, not in Utica. No, it's an Albany expression.
I see. You know, these hamburgers are quite similar to the ones they have at...
Big Kahuna burger.
Oh, no. Patented Skinner burgers. Old family recipe.
For steamed hams.
Yes.
Yes, and you call them steamed hams despite the fact they are obviously grilled.
You know, excuse me for 1 second.
Yes, I should be. Good Lord, what is happening in there?
Aurora Borealis?
Aurora Borealis. At this time of year, at this time of day, in this part of the country, localized entirely within your kitchen.
Yes.
That's it?
No.
Well, Seymour, you are an odd fellow, but I must say, you steam a good ham.
Bona la cow, my garden of roses. YouTube is acting weird. I usually set it up so that I go live as soon as it starts getting data. And I did that with this video, but for some reason it just didn't take. So now, it's, and yes, I threw myself off by with all of this, I ended up throwing myself off. You'll get your audio in just a second, guys, don't worry. Unfortunately, I now need to start over from the top, and I'm just gotta get my head straight. I'm terribly sorry, but thank you all so very much for showing up and sticking around. I did not mean for this to take so long. Now, if you guys have been paying attention, I've been releasing videos on a daily basis now, and they're about 10-minute videos covering single subjects, where I'm mostly talking off the cuff, and in those videos I've been requesting that people respond to the videos in the comments so that I can respond to their comments on my Saturday show. And that's what I'm going to do now. I already responded to all of them, but unfortunately YouTube did not, you know, offer that. It fucked me up, and I fucked things up from there, but let's just get to it, alright? We're going to start with the fact that I've gotten a lot of positive response from these videos, such as from Charlotte Meekenkamp, who's a new subscriber. Thank you so very much, by the way. So glad I found you. You explain things very well. Are you perhaps related to Styx? And sadly, no. If I was related to Styx, Hex, and Hammer, I think I would have a much easier time getting a hold of him and starting a show, you know, doing a stream with him, which is something I've been interested in doing for a few weeks now. I've been trying to reach him, but he doesn't tend to respond to my tweets or my DMs, and I mean, I understand, he's a busy guy. But, I mean, I would love to take the time to talk to him, especially about a place that he has a very large gap in his understanding of things. Because when Styx talks about politics, he's very on the point. He's very good at it. But when it comes to Styx, Hex, and Hammer talking about things like the technical side of Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and Google, he really is off the ball, and I would love to help him out in helping him understand those things a little better. So, unfortunately, it's not the case, but I will, keep on trying to get a hold of him, and maybe if one of you were able to get him to see one of my videos, he might consider talking with me. I think that would be pretty awesome. Moving on, one of the big videos from this week was my video about the Netherlands, AIVD, and Cozy Bear being accused of hacking the DNC and the US elections, which is completely uncited. And I ended up getting a lot of comments in Dutch of all languages, so it was really hard to follow along with what was being said and argued in that section of my comments. But there was a lot of people who came out saying things similar to this. Many thanks from Holland, clear explanation. Our mainstream news is terrible on this issue. We can ask if the AIVD can retrieve the 5 months worth of FBI text messages. And I got more, there was a number of responses like this where people were saying thank you for explaining this so clearly, because it really is, there's not a lot of source, there's not a lot of evidence to support the idea that A, the Cozy Bear and Fancy Bear are part of the FSB or SVR in Russia, or even connected to them, especially given the fact that it's it's college students, and the only evidence they have, it comes from a college server, and there's a lot left to question even with that. However, the fact of the matter is, the Netherlands, with regards to its politics, is considered to fall around the center-right, but that's relative to Germany and France, which are very far left right now. And I would consider the politics of the Netherlands pretty centrist at this point. But the media is very liberal, is very left-leaning, and as such, takes the piss out of the government quite a lot, takes the piss out of everyone quite a lot, but never offers much in the way of substantive information. It's very frustrating to me. And the fact that people from Holland are coming out and letting me know, yeah, this is what we think too, gives me the impression that I absolutely should be spending more time looking into the politics in the Netherlands and seeing how things are going. Moving on, from my video on Peter Strzok and the missing FBI text messages, one of my longtime viewers, Curated Opinion, said, "At the point where no intelligence agency or investigative bureau can be trusted, who's left to trust?" An amazing question. Thank you so much for that, Curated. I find it really important to clarify what a republic government is like, especially in the United States, because you would think, oh, the FBI can't be trusted, except the FBI is, at the top at least, are people who are nominated and put in that position by Congress and the President. And as such, if corruption is exposed at those high levels within intelligence and investigative agencies, it is Congress's position to perform investigations and remove corrupt elements and replace them as quickly as possible. And as such, I really think that the best solution here is to trust the actual process by which these things go through, whether that be executive appointment or congressional investigation, oversight, and appointment, which would allow us to look into these situations and with hope expose very publicly the vetting of those people who are to replace them. For example, I'm not actually a fan of Robert Mueller being the one in charge of this special investigation against Donald Trump, because he himself has a long history of what's the word I'm looking for? It's not corruption necessarily, but it's certainly controversy following him around with regards to the Clinton email server, with regards to his investigations into 9/11 especially, which was a huge problem that he oversaw. He essentially allowed the Saudis to leave the country after 9/11, which was a large problem for the Bush administration especially, when he should have been the one looking, he should have been the one observing this stuff, investigating this stuff, and yet nothing came of it. And while Congress does have a lot of aspects that cannot be trusted right now. We're also moving into midterm elections, and that makes it our responsibility as Americans, at least for those of us who are Americans, to actually vote out these corrupt elements and replace them with people who are actually there to represent us. So it's very important that you get out there and vote if you're in the United States, so that we can actually see correct oversight and have the ability to trust in our government and in our governmental institutions. From my video on the school shooting earlier this week in Kentucky, another long-term viewer says, "The education is clearly geared towards helping girls thrive, with no concern for males. My son has been repeatedly singled out for the heinous crime of being a rowdy boy." And this is a problem that I'm probably going to be addressing more and more in the coming weeks, because this is a concern of mine. I know I deal a lot with homeless men, but at the same time, I see myself as a men's rights activist in a lot of ways. And one thing I'm very familiar with is the mistreatment of boys and the way boys are ignored at the high school and college level, especially with regards to mental health, physical health, and well-being. With programs like physical education and sports programs being cut, and finances for schools being heavily dependent on social justice and elective service classes, it's quite a fucking problem. And these boys absolutely need the assistance that they can get, because they're going through a hormonal and emotional time for them that no one seems to respect. And in a time when they need to be able to get through a lot of emotional things, and when they need to be able to get through a lot of physical changes in themselves, which make them, you know, fidgety, for lack of a better word, they are instead ignored and treated like they have no interest in the material, when mostly they just have trouble focusing. And this is something that needs to be addressed if we want to see a reduction in school shootings in this country. We don't have the same system in place to help boys that we do for girls, because there's this expectation that people have that boys already get everything they want, which is absolutely not the case. Just take into account the argument that that woman made about pink helmets, Kathy Newman, from the Jordan Peterson debate, which not only is completely untrue. Pink helmets are not more expensive, but helmets designed for girls might be more expensive due to the fact that the market sees them being able to get more money due to the demand for specialized items which need not be specialized. I'll bring you on in just a little bit. I'm going to finish off what I'm doing here. Red Frog, just let me finish up these comments. I've only got one more. There's one from Ghost Dog, another longtime viewer, who said, "I like it, Sevi. You get a full picture of the issue in response to the Trump and Schumer's negotiations regarding DACA and the wall. I do have a question," he says. "Will the sanctuary cities, governments, and Democrats of those states go along with it or fight it in the judiciary system again?" Right now, what we're actually seeing is these states are operating at the state level using their constitutionally granted state level strength in order to contradict the federal government, and they're completely within their right to do so, absolutely. But to do so in ways that directly hinder the federal government, and that is definitely going to lead to federal circuit courts seeing cases about states versus the federal government, and especially on the issues of immigration and interference with law enforcement. This is especially the case when it comes to immigrations and customs enforcement in the state of California, where we're going to be seeing thousands of warrants having to be issued just to investigate the hiring of illegal immigrants by companies in California. And now, I was also planning this week on doing a stream with someone special who's actually in the audience right now. And we weren't able to do it, but honestly, I want to see what she has to say about things, because she doesn't normally just jump in and say, hey, bring me on. So let me set things up for you. Let me set things up so that I can get you in on the stream. I'm not sure I've got everything in place for that. But, yeah, let me just fix the audio. I've still got a number of news stories I need to cover as well. But I didn't realize you still wanted to do that show with me, Red Frog. So, give me a moment to get that set up. Actually, you know what? Let's save it to the end of the show, because I really want to go through these news articles that I've got. I'm going to save that for the end of the show, because I've already got my news articles set up, I've already got my notes, and I'm really happy that people are leaving comments on my videos. So try and catch my videos throughout the week, and if you think of a question or you have something to say, respond, and you might get me to respond to you on my show every Saturday. But moving onward, we've got a few stories that I think are really important to cover to sweep up the week, because I've covered a lot of stories, like 10 or 11 stories this week in my shorter videos. But, you know, even doing that, I miss a number of stories, and there are things that need to be covered in more detail. And to start with, this might seem strange as a story to cover, but I find it very important to cover just for the sheer amount of detail that this can give you about the current state of politics. ShareBlue was banned from Reddit this week, which is an enormous impact on Democratic side propaganda. Now, for those of you who don't know, ShareBlue is David Brock's attempt to create essentially what he considers the Breitbart of the left, which is a pretty foolish way to accomplish something, due to the fact that most people consider Breitbart to be a propaganda forum for the right, even if they don't go out of their way to influence politics, rather commenting on politics with a very severe biased bent. There's a reason I don't use Breitbart very much on this show, and likewise, there's a reason I don't use ShareBlue very much on this show. Now, Reddit has very strict rules about organizations and companies and the employees of those organizations posting links to their own source without broadcasting their affiliation, and ShareBlue has, across the last 6 months or so, repeatedly attempted to post links under employee accounts and boost those links with the assistance of other employees of ShareBlue. Reddit, of course, had to take the time to clarify that this action was not subject to political bias, which I find hilarious because, for one, Reddit has a rather severe left-leaning bent in most of their largest subreddits, as they're called. So they had to explain that no, we're not showing slight favor towards the right with this, which is extremely disturbing. But let's read about this. In August of 2017, we addressed an account associated with ShareBlue that had been submitting and commenting upon content from that organization without disclosing its affiliation. At that time, we did not have an explicit rule governing disclosure of affiliation with media outlets. We were troubled by the behavior, but after reviewing the available information, we believed that it was poor judgment motivated by enthusiasm, not malice. Therefore, we assumed good faith and acted accordingly. On August 28th, we added a rule requiring the disclosure of employment. Now, Reddit, of course, is a very strange place. I don't use it that much, but the reason I found this story important is because it gives you a good lens into the disintegrating propaganda machine that is coming out of the left right now. And it is a disintegrating propaganda machine. Our Politics expressly forbids users who are employed by a source to post link submissions to that source, da-da-da-da-da. Employees of any Our Politics sources should only participate in our sub under their organization name or via flare identifying them as such. We also sent the message to ShareBlue. However, within the last week, we discovered an account that aroused some suspicion. This account posted regarding ShareBlue without disclosing any affiliation with the company. It appeared to be an ordinary user and spoke of the organization in the third person. Communications from the account were in part directed at the moderation team. Our investigation became significant, relying on personal information and identifying details. We determined conclusively that this was a ShareBlue account, associated account, under the same control as the account we'd messaged in August. I can't see my chat. I'm sorry, everyone. I'll respond to your question in the chat just a moment. Lord of Cancer, and I haven't forgot about you, Red Frog, just a moment. I'm so sorry. I put so much work into these Saturday shows that my brain is kind of going into a flow, and interrupting that would really... I'll start stuttering. It'd be really embarrassing. I really want to get through these stories before I start pulling people onto the show. And, yeah. You should not hide your affiliation to your project or site or lie about who you are with or something. Don't use sock puppets to promote your content on Reddit. Now, for those, I talk about ShareBlue pretty frequently because ShareBlue is a large part of, ShareBlue is an enormous part of the propaganda machine that is Media Matters, CrowdStrike, Fusion GPS, ShareBlue, and other services whose entire purpose is more than just putting a democratic spin on situations, but actually attempting to force Democrats to bend to the progressive state will. And there's actually a news article that came out at the beginning of last year that explains this very well. And I wanted to take the time to go through this article, which is an interview with David Brock, to explain why I'm so very against the influence of ShareBlue and why I believe the Democratic propaganda machines that we've been seeing are on a steep downward decline. Shortly after the election, as it dawned on the left that Breitbart was a true media force to be reckoned with, liberal operative and media watchdog David Brock announced to his donors that he wanted to turn his website, ShareBlue, into a Breitbart of the left, a partisan news site that would seek to undermine Donald Trump's incoming administration. The notion was instantly derided as facile, superficial, and unlikely to solve anything. David Brock is the worst possible messenger for Democrats. He should not be given a single dollar more, progressive strategist Jonathan Tassini told The Hill. Vox said the idea was just the latest in a long, sad history of liberal efforts to copy right-wing media. And this is absolutely true. Look at the way MSNBC has changed in the last 8 years. Look at the way that, the Huffington Post has doubled down on their progressive politics and misleading of the public. You can see that there is a long history of people trying to be Fox News, but for the left. And now David Brock is doing the exact same thing, but with regards to Breitbart, and without the strength of a frontman like Milo Yiannopoulos. Brock, who came to prominence as a right-leaning journalist before switching sides and founding the left-wing media watchdog organization Media Matters, is undeterred by the criticism. In a wide-ranging conversation, he laid out how Democrats lost their way, why the party struggles to connect with voters, and what the left can learn from the right. Breitbart is just the analogy. We're not going to do what they do, we're going to be an antidote to what they do, he argued. We're going to use facts. a matter that we know to be completely untrue, from the Media Matters and Democracy Matters strategic plan of action that was leaked just last year, covering the amount of information that they are willing to lie about and the amount of information they're willing to spin in order to put non-progressive Democrats in a corner for not supporting them in fighting against Trump. And of course, that, as well as all the other articles I'm going through, are in the description below. Let's continue with the interview, because this interview will explain rather clearly why ShareBlue is getting banned from Reddit, from other news sites. The only people who are still truly supporting ShareBlue, and they're a huge supporter, is Google News specifically. Google News republishes and promotes everything ShareBlue releases. If you search for ShareBlue, you will not find any negative press about ShareBlue. You will only find articles about ShareBlue, and at the moment, the articles regarding, or articles by ShareBlue, and at the moment, the Reddit posts saying, we have also banned ShareBlue from our board, we have also banned ShareBlue from our subreddits. But the Hive asked, what was the purpose of ShareBlue, and what do you want to turn it into? To which David Brock responded, the purpose of ShareBlue was to make a case for Hillary Clinton in a way that would engage grassroots audiences. Listen to this, and when you hear people say grassroots audiences, it's extremely important at this point in time to realize what they mean is we want to pull off the same successful action that the Tea Party accomplished in 2011 to 2013. The only reason the Democrats even began to care about grassroots action was a mix of the Occupy Wall Street, which was quite a failed action, and Tea Party movements, with the Tea Party being extremely successful and Occupy Wall Street being a perfect example of the way the left can fail so miserably when it comes to grassroots action. The highest trafficked item we ran to in the whole campaign was an article titled, Hillary is one of the most ethical and lied about political leaders in America, which is not very true. I won't deny that she's probably lied about, but she's most certainly not ethical. She has such a long history of terrible ethics that it's absolutely disturbing that this was such a popular and trafficked item. This was shared more than 2 million times. We were making arguments for Hillary, and they were factual arguments. The fact that he has to say that kind of makes it sound dishonest. But they had an emotional tenor to them, and I think that's something that's missing in a lot of liberal communications. Yet another thing that shows what he's trying to do and exposes what ShareBlue is about. They want to play on the emotional heartstrings of Democrats. Democrats being within the category that 40 years ago would have been described as bleeding heart liberals. They're dry and fact-driven, but people want more than just facts, and that's one difference. The other difference is that there are sites like the Huffington Post that are really progressive or liberal, but they weren't democratic. They weren't especially pro-Hillary. That's bullshit. They would not even give Donald Trump the time of day until they had no fucking choice in the matter. We saw an opening. The context in which we were presented her candidacy was that Hillary had problems running as the candidate of continuity and the status quo in an environment where most voters wanted change. It's amazing that he'll come out and actually say these things because he's directly contradicting a large amount of the narrative that is thrown around on the left with regards to the results of the election. So, Peter Dow positioned her not as the victim, but as the underdog in a society filled with rampant sexism and media bias against her. And that worked for an online audience. Now, we all know she's not an underdog. She is among one of the wealthiest foundation supporters in the Clinton Foundation and in the Democratic Party, with political control well beyond most people's wildest dreams. And she's nowhere near an underdog. She was essentially, you know, knighted to be the next president by the Obama administration, and had the full support of the Democratic Party, who lost miserably in as David Brock explains himself, an environment where most voters wanted change. Then the election happened. We thought we would win, and going forward, we thought we'd be a supportive voice for the Hillary's administration. And of course, that went out the window. Basically, what I've been saying since the election is that we want to create a Breitbart. The press had said Breitbart of the left. It's really an antidote to Breitbart on the left. In other words, Breitbart is just the analogy. But of course, what they turned into is something far greater, far more troublesome, where they're willing to break rules, break laws, outright lie, and manipulate people and politicians alike in order to push their narrative and move this country into a far more progressive, which translates to regressive, nature. You have a lot of catching up to do, Vanity Fair said. Breitbart recently hit about 40 million uniques in a calendar month. To which he said, we've got a ways to go. I'm not kidding myself here. But I think there's an opening for media platforms that is openly, avowedly liberal, pro-Democrat, and that wants Democrats to win. But here's the distinction. We were going to be the voice for Hillary. Or at least a voice for Hillary. And now that we're not going to do that, our approach is going to be to tell the truth. I mean, honestly, with the amount of lies that have come out, especially from ShareBlue, the amount of, ShareBlue is known rather directly to put a lot of effort into pouring propaganda onto boards like 4chan and 8chan, not to mention filling sites like Reddit with their links and voting them up themselves with their vote bots and vote brigades. This information came out all throughout the last 2 years with the evidence of applications which have thousands of accounts wired up on Reddit in order to upvote those accounts. Hundreds of people hired whose only job is to start arguments and be pro-Hillary, pro-Democrat on the admittedly very right-leaning 4chan poll and 8chan poll. The politically incorrect boards on those sites. So it's a big change. By that I mean we will be, when I think it's due, just as critical of Democrats as we will be consistently of Trump and the Republicans. I again bring up David Brock's memo on... this is the confidential memo on fighting Trump. This is entirely a propaganda machine where they are going to fight on every front of the internet to boost themselves and mislead reporters and congresspeople alike for the sake of pushing a pro-Hillary, pro-Democrat message. This is far beyond what Breitbart does. Breitbart may be very pro-Trump, but they don't go out of their way to manipulate the media. They don't go out of their way to manipulate congressmen. They are merely biased in an environment where that bias is very welcome. Because let's face it, it's the internet. People want to have their biases confirmed. They want to have their feelings stroked. So you'd be pushing more of a progressive rather than center-left vision, VF asks. We're going to push a progressive vision, but we're going after spineless Democrats who want to make nice with Trump. This is another one of those statements that ties directly back into David Brock's campaign against Donald Trump. The fact of the matter is, he's openly admitting that he is going to fight against and slander anyone who doesn't toe the Progressive Party line. And this Progressive Party line is remarkably communist in nature. I wouldn't name names right now, but we don't know what they're going to do. But if history is our guide, there are a lot of Democrats in Congress, so I think that's plenty to work with. The most hilarious thing about this is that there aren't a lot more Democrats in Congress. Democrats lost most of the special elections, with the grand exception being the Alabama special election for Judge Roy Moore, which has nothing to do with Congress and everything to do with the judiciary in Alabama. I'll give you an example. There's a lot of chatter about cooperating with Trump on an infrastructure spending bill. What I would say to that is, no, we can't, because of his tax returns. See, they're trying to bring up things that don't matter. David Brock wants to address things that have nothing to do with the matter, entirely for the purpose of misleading the public. And of course, the interview goes on, and you can continue to see that he is going to completely throw journalistic integrity out the window for the sake of condemning not only Donald Trump, but anyone who even works with him. And this has been a long-standing problem for the Democratic Party, and something that I think needs to be absolutely addressed. You can't win by just calling someone a racist, sexist, homophobe anymore. We are not in that environment. You actually need to be doing things for the American people as a whole. And let's face it, Donald Trump, whether you like him or not, is doing things for Americans as a whole. This tax plan that was passed at the end of last year and confirmed at the beginning of this year is coming into effect at the 1st of February. And people are going to see a lot more money in their checks, whether or not they work for a company like AT&T or Apple, because their company is going to be taxed less, they're going to be taxed less, and they're going to be taking home a 10% more of their paycheck than they were in December and possibly January, depending how these companies plan on doing this. This does not only serve corporations, this serves everyone from the worst jobs at the bottom all the way up. And this is why Donald Trump's support has grown from the 36% at midpoint last year to 46% by the most harsh of polling groups like Gallup, and arguably 53% according to polls done by Fox News and the Citizens for, oh, what is that, their name? Crew. Citizens for... the watchdog group that does major polling in this country. The abbreviation is CREW. I can't remember what it stands for off the top of my head, and I apologize for that. But regardless of what you think of Trump, he's giving people back their money from their checks. And come February 1st, that money is going to make a huge difference in his polling numbers. And the left is going to lose a lot of the support that they're already losing due to this manipulative nature, where they want to reach out and stroke people's feelings without actually doing anything for them. This ties back to the Democratic plan that has existed for nearly 60 years in this country, where they pretend to be supportive of minority groups, but never actually do anything for those minority groups. They just continue marketing themselves as the party of the minority groups, while they screw them over financially with higher taxes, screw them over socially by making promises they never keep, and manipulating their emotions in a way that leaves them in a lot of trouble. Now, I had a number of questions that I wanted to answer from the chat, so I'm just going to scroll back for just a second. Lord of Cancer asked, Sevi, did you hear that the former Argentine president was arrested and is being put on trial? I did, but I could not find any good sources yet. That's probably going to have to be a story that I cover through the week next week. I love covering South American politics because a lot of people ignore them. And Argentina is a country that is very plagued with corruption and communist influences, and as such, seeing Kirchner put in that position makes me want to go out and find better sources. Unfortunately, it might take me a few days to get those and to make sure that they're translated appropriately, because we don't get good translations of those stories up in the United States. I speak decent Spanish, but my Portuguese is terrible. So I'm going to have to go through, do some auto-translation, and then manually tweak the translation and go over it with people I know who speak Spanish and Portuguese to make sure I'm getting the whole story. But do look forward to that in the upcoming week. Let's see, there was another question, I believe. I guess there wasn't another question, so I'm just going to move on to the next story. Do please read the interview with David Brock and David Brock's leaked memo on his fight against Trump. They're linked in the description box below. I think they're going to be very revealing if you read both of them and understand that his entire plan is to speak in this manner that he does in this interview, while completely contradicting himself in action. And I find it really important to pay attention to the actions of people, the results of people, especially when they speak so highly of things. Like, oh, we're the Democrats, we're going to be truthful, when the fact of the matter is they're being just as biased and dishonest as Breitbart, as Fox News has been known to be. Now, I feel it important to note that Fox News has turned over a new leaf, and we're going to be seeing even more changes as Murdoch's son begins taking power. So I suspect Fox News is going to maintain its lead as most watched name in news, as well as gaining a lot more trust from the American people, Democrat or otherwise. But our next story is the Saudi Arabian crackdown on corruption, and this is a fascinating story to me. Now, Saudi Arabia has been cracking down on the supporters of extremist and Wahhabist groups under the leadership of the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and wresting their financial sources over the last few months. Over $100 billion have been seized from nearly 200 Saudi royals, prominent businessmen, and prominent celebrities within Saudi Arabia in the crackdown. And amongst them, they have been forced to essentially pay financial settlements in order to regain their freedom, which honestly I don't agree with whatsoever, but at the same time it seems like it's the only way that Saudi Arabia has to punish these people who have actively supported terrorists and Wahhabist nationals. 95 of these holdouts within the kingdom, people who have held out and refused to pay these settlements, are planned to be tried for refusing to pay their settlements. And unfortunately, you know, we're going to be hearing about this more and more as the week goes on. But apart from Kingdom Holding Group, or Kingdom Holding Company, the single company within the royal family that manages most of the investment that Saudi Arabia does in companies like Twitter, Lyft, the ride-sharing service that's in competition with Uber, and companies like that, which, I mean, they invest heavily in technology, oil, companies in the United States, companies in Europe, they're very big in Europe right now. And Kingdom Holdings Group is the only company that keeps its money in Saudi Arabia. Most of the Saudi royals keep their finances in tax havens outside of the country, far from the reaches of authorities who would wish to seize them. Some of the detainees have been moved to Al-Hayr prison, a maximum security facility which was modified to accommodate these wealthy men, giving them far better treatment than the average inmate of Al-Hayr. However, the most wealthy of these detainees in Saudi Arabia's corruption crackdown were kept in a makeshift prison in Riyadh's Ritz-Carlton Hotel. And this includes, of course, Prince al-Waleed bin Talal, who is the chairman of Kingdom Holding Group, the group we're going to be speaking about the most during this story. Prince al-Waleed was held for 2 months but released this week from detainment after he made an agreement to pay the Saudi government $6 billion of the $100 billion he has in Kingdom Holding. He's also one of the richest individuals in the world, and his company, Kingdom Holding, has the largest voting shareholder in companies like Twitter, Four Seasons, Lyft, hotels in Germany, just every industry you can imagine. You can go look it up, and he is a very large, if not the largest, contributing investor. Due to paying his $6 billion, charges of corruption will be cleared from al-Waleed. And Crown Prince Mohammed's finance minister, Mohammed al-Jadaan, announced this month that the money that was seized in these financial settlements is going to be used to help citizens cope with the rising cost of living in Saudi Arabia. Unfortunately, there's a lot more to this story, and it's important to understand this stuff because Saudi Arabia is an ally, unfortunately. And despite the fact that they are putting on a face that they are trying to fight against corruption, and especially extremist corruption within their government, we're starting to see that money talks a lot more than, even politics do. From the article, Saudi Arabia's crown prince is stepping up on pressure on detained members of the country's elite, resisting his demands for billions of dollars in payments, moving them from a luxury hotel to prison, according to people familiar with the move, and threatening them with prosecution. The kingdom has wrested about $100 billion from most of the 350 Saudi royals and prominent business people arrested in what the Saudi leader has said is a corruption purge. The public prosecutor's office said this week that officials were moving ahead with plans for trials of 95 holdouts who are still detained and have declined to pay what government describes as financial settlements. The number of detainees has been dropping as the negotiations continue. Saudi officials have said they want to make their financial deals rather than prosecute. Initially calculated that they could confiscate over $800 billion in assets. But rich Saudis have long parked much of their wealth outside the country, putting it outside the reach of authorities who would wish to overcome legal hurdles and secrecy protections to seize it. The Saudi leadership is now realizing that you can't just press the give me money button because there's no such button in the first place, said a Europe-based financial advisor with clients detained in Saudi Arabia. Among the holdouts are Prince Turki bin Abdullah, son of the late King Abdullah, and Prince al-Waleed bin Talal, one of the world's richest men and holder of stakes in companies including Twitter and Four Seasons. Saudi officials have ordered Prince al-Waleed to pay $6 billion, and people close to him said. The billionaire has been moved from the Riyadh Ritz-Carlton to a palace compound in eastern Riyadh, surrounded by a recently added barbed wire fence, according to people familiar with his situation. Prince al-Waleed, who hasn't spoken publicly since his detention began in early November, denies wrongdoing and is fighting allegations of bribery, extortion, and money laundering, a person close to him said. God, I fucking hate those words. Those are words I hate more than anything else in a news article. A person close to him. Give me names, Wall Street Journal. Give me names, MSNBC. I am so sick and tired of people thinking they can get away with giving completely unverifiable information under the guise of persons close to the matter, a person close to him, people informed on the matter. I mean, let's face it, we live in a world where propaganda right now is at an all-time high, where dishonesty in the media has created so much doubt that Congress is the only group of people with less trust than the American media. And Donald Trump, a person that these groups have done everything in their power to condemn, now has higher approval ratings at 45%. And an improvement in GDP of 2.6% to stand on top of. These groups don't have a leg to stand on, and we've reached back into the 1890s when yellow journalism was at its worst. The last time yellow journalism was at this point. It's absolutely disturbing to me. Officials have said the crackdowns come under Saudi legislation and Islamic law forbidding forms of corruption, though no charges have been made public and it isn't clear whether the accused have been brought before judges. Of course, that doesn't actually matter in Saudi Arabia, as you don't actually have to be brought before a judge, you don't have the right to an attorney, you don't have the right to a jury trial, you don't have any of those rights in Saudi Arabia. Male, female, or otherwise. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman described the arrests as part of an effort to remake Saudi Arabia as a modern society with less graft, a more moderate Islam, and less dependence on oil, And this is where the story comes completely together. They're not trying to, I mean, as much as I'm sure Prince Mohammed bin Salman wants to do away with the corruption rife in Saudi Arabia, he knows he can't completely do it. He knows he himself has to take advantage of the corrupt environment within Saudi Arabia to solve the problem. So he is going after the very wealthiest people in the country, let alone the world, to get their money and create less dependence on their dwindling oil sources. Their oil wells are drying up. They know it. And they need money to maintain their wars and proxy wars against Iran. Saudi Arabia is doing everything in their power to get money in any way that they can that isn't selling oil. Because it's cheaper to buy oil from Central America. It's cheaper to buy oil from Eastern Russia and the tar sands in Canada. It's much cheaper that way, and Saudi Arabia is losing their place as an OPEC leader. They know that if they don't crack down on corruption, or at least give the image that they're cracking down on corruption, they're going to start losing their financial strength in the world. And this is extremely important to talk about because Saudi Arabia invests heavily in the United States. And while people might be afraid of China pulling out their debt holdings in the United States, Saudi Arabia has two choices. Go after the corrupt multi-billionaires within the country, or start selling off the one bargaining chip that keeps the United States on their side, debt holdings. There's actually another story from AFP, who I've fucked up multiple times in pronouncing, the Agence France Presse, who covers this story a little differently. Starting here, Prince al-Waleed, dubbed the Warren Buffett of Saudi Arabia, was among the high-profile detainee among 350 suspects rounded up since November 4th, including business tycoons and ministers who were held in Riyadh's luxury Ritz-Carlton hotel. The prince was released following an undisclosed financial agreement with the government, which is believed to be $6 billion from unnamed sources. God damn it. Similar to deals the authorities struck with most other detainees in exchange for their freedom. The Attorney General this morning approved the settlement with Prince al-Waleed bin Talal, paving the way for his release, a government source said without disclosing figures. Skipping ahead, a business associate confirmed to AFP that the tycoon had been released. Prince al-Waleed is the latest in a series of high-profile detainees to be freed from the hotel, as a campaign launched by the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman draws to a close. Authorities on Friday released media mogul Walid al-Ibrahim, owner of influential Arab satellite network MBC. That's M as in Mary, BC. Ibrahim held a family gathering at his residence after his release, 3 MBC employees told AFP, on condition of anonymity. The staff also received an official email congratulating him on his freedom. Oh shit, this wasn't the article I wanted to read. Oh well. I'm just gonna go off cuff for just a second. And I'm gonna respond to this from Red Frog. I love you, dear. I love you so much. Hell do you have me for a woman? I speak multiple languages. Yes, you do, but I tend to think of you for Eastern European languages. And, I mean, honestly, I grew up in America, which means Spanish is my second language. I may focus on French, but I'm actually very good in Spanish. Portuguese less so, yes, but I can get good at it as well. I'll make sure to bring you in on that stuff. I didn't realize that you wanted in on it. Good lord. Just a second, let me check on things. Alright, but yes, Saudi Arabia needs to have a lot more eyes on them right now, because what they're doing is absolutely corrupt in another direction. I don't care that the people they're taking this money from are supporting terrorists or not. I mean, I do care, but the fact of the matter is these settlements aren't going to stop them from doing that, especially if charges are cleared. Saudi Arabia is caving on one of the best decisions they've made in 100 years of existence. And unless the United States especially, but other nations, call them out and explain to them that, look, you can't just expect these people to go straight because you charged them $6 billion, because they have another $94 billion in their pocket that they can use for the purpose of laundering, for the purpose of supporting extremists, for the sake of attacking people they disagree with over religious differences. If Saudi Arabia really wants to modernize, they need to do more than put on a show of taking dirty money and trying to use it in a positive light. Well, I didn't realize you were that good with Latin languages. I apologize. I will certainly try to keep you in the loop on those things in the coming day, in the future. But next up on my list, strangely enough, is a man who got his start in Europe and under the Nazi Party, got very rich due to Nazis taking money from Jews, and now promotes himself as a liberal of all things, George Soros. And unfortunately, it's one of those moments where I feel really weird, because George Soros is saying something I agree with. Now, he only says something I agree with for about 2 minutes, and then completely loses the plot afterwards. But George Soros gave a speech in Davos shortly after the speech given by Donald Trump at the World Economic Forum, in which he was talking about Facebook and Google. And it's quite interesting, the little rant that he went into. Misclicked. Now, for those who don't know, George Soros is a famed billionaire and liberal investor who at Davos called Google and Facebook a menace to society whose days are numbered. He compared them to oil and mining companies which exploit the physical environment, stating that these companies exploit the social environment, and he echoed the sentiments of Sir Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web, or so it's described, although it's safe to say that the World Wide Web was the result of many people's work, in stating that these companies have become obstacles to innovation that need to be regulated as utilities aimed at preserving competition, innovation, and open universal access. I know, right? It's so bizarre hearing this man say something that I might actually agree with. It kind of bothers me. This, of course, comes at a time when companies like Salesforce and the Wall Street Journal are calling for antitrust investigations and regulations to be put on these tech giants. So it's not like he's talking about this stuff in a manner that is unfamiliar. But it also comes shortly after... shortly afterward, he used the stage time to also condemn Donald Trump, declaring that the president has set a course for nuclear war. That statement comes after the recent adjustment of the so-called doomsday clock to 2 minutes to midnight, a descriptor for the likelihood of nuclear or otherwise apocalyptic events, and the closest we have been since 1953, following the Berlin airlift and the start of a more severe... the rising of the Cold War into the state which it became across the span of the 60s and 70s. Though it's important to note that we have been at 2.5 minutes to midnight since 2015, and the climate fears had dominated the media. He blames the current environment of possible nuclear war on the United States having incentivized North Korea to develop its nuclear capacity, which would in turn induce the United States to use its nuclear superiority preemptively. And this is where he's completely lost the plot. Because if he thinks that Donald Trump is just going to nuke a country flat out, he's out of his mind. One, Donald Trump has been as hands-off as possible with the military, instead relying heavily on General Mattis and other people within the at the head of the Department of Defense and their expertise. Because Donald Trump knows he hasn't been to war and knows that he would not make the best decisions for a military. And that's the entire reason Donald Trump has appointed people of the greatest caliber to his cabinet to run the Department of Defense, Department of Navy, Army, the Department of Navy, the Department of the Army, and is so intent on allowing them to do what they think is best in military strategy. And the military strategy surrounding North Korea has very little to do with actually attacking North Korea, and instead is the result of a plan of attrition. China and Russia have had sanctions put upon them, both by the United States and the UN, for allowing oil to get into and assisting North Korea in getting oil. South Korea is under constant scrutiny for being so willing to bring North Korea into the Olympics. And the fact of the matter is, with all of the sanctions that exist against North Korea, we're starving out their financial strength. We're starving out their people, and Kim Jong-un is going to have little choice but to eventually stop playing this children's game of, oh, I'm tougher, oh, I'm tougher, oh, I'm tougher, not because of the United States, but because of Japan. Japan has an amazing military that has been developed and trained by the United States and given more and more independence over the last 40 years or so, 30 years? 30 years or so. Especially in the last 10 years, Japan has gained quite a lot of independence, with American bases being lower and lower staffed, and instead Japan being allowed to exercise its military according to its interests rather than U.S. interests. And as North Korea continues to experiment and test Japan, Japan has every right to make the threats that they're making against North Korea. And if Japan goes to war, the United States doesn't have to land a nuke, because Japan can fire a salvo of missiles that will cover Pyongyang to the missile silos. And it's not like Korea has very effective ICBMs and nuclear missiles to begin with. The furthest they're able to send their missiles is about 200 miles. They're able to clear Japan, but they can barely reach Alaska. They can't reach Seattle. They can't reach Los Angeles. And the fact of the matter is, if North Korea does something stupid, it is going to result in China, Russia, and Japan solving the problem, and no nuclear weapons having been sent out by these nations. The only nation that is even at risk of setting off a nuclear weapon is North Korea, and they are at greater risk of blowing themselves up than anyone else around them. But from the story, let me check on the chat right quick. The Russian Federation wants North Korea as a spa resort. Well, they're probably going to get it if Kim Jong-un keeps fucking around, because China is going to have to come in and take in all those refugees that they don't want. And Japan's going to come in and say, hey, South Korea, watch out. And just railroad all the way up. Because the Japanese military still has the same pride that the Japanese military had 60, 70 years ago. Now they've been let off the leash by Americans. Also, hello Rick Sheck, so glad to have you here. We actually got started a little late, so you've only missed about an hour. I fucked things up, and YouTube fucked things up for me, so it's been a bit problematic. But yes, from the story, here it is. Facebook and Google have become obstacles to innovation and are a menace to society whose days are numbered, says billionaire investor and philanthropist George Soros at the World Economic Forum in Davos on Thursday. Mining and oil companies exploit the physical environment. Social media companies exploit the social environment, said the Hungarian-American businessman, according to a transcript of his speech. This is particularly nefarious because social media companies influence how people think and behave without them even being aware of it. This has far-reaching and adverse consequences on the functioning of democracy, particularly on the integrity of elections. In addition to skewing democracy, social media companies deceive their users by manipulating their attention and directing it towards their own commercial purposes, and deliberately engineer addiction to the services they provide. The latter, he said, can be very harmful, particularly for adolescents. Now, while he might say it in a rather extreme way, this is something I agree very strongly with him about. Social media is becoming obsessive for people, and people can't seem to connect with people directly, instead preferring to make all of their decisions, all of their interactions over services like Facebook, so services like Twitter. And it can be harmful, especially to adolescents who've never taken the time to learn how to socialize directly. Skipping ahead, Soros warned of an even more alarming prospect on the horizon if data-rich internet companies such as Facebook and Google paired their corporate surveillance systems with state-sponsored surveillance, a trend that's already emerging in places such as the Philippines. This is actually one of the huge concerns I have, and one of the reasons that I talk about corporate feudalism so much, because the Philippines especially abuses their relationship with Google in order to surveil their citizens. And as much as I love Duterte in the Philippines, he is getting to be on the dangerous side of authoritarian. Again, I'm just as much against terrorism as the next person, but when you get to the point where you are terrorizing your own people with surveillance and fear-mongering, that you are just as much of a pain on your people as the terrorists. The only thing that you have the only thing Duterte has over the terrorists right now, well, I can't say Duterte. Duterte himself is actually doing great, but agencies under Duterte are proving that the one thing they're doing better is they're not killing Filipinos, but they're most certainly creating a surveillance state within the Philippines, which is terrifying to say the least. This may well result in a web of totalitarian control, the likes of which Aldous Huxley or George Orwell could not have even imagined. The internet monopolies have neither the will nor inclination to protect society against the consequences of their actions. This turns them into a menace and falls to the regulatory authorities to protect society against them. This is where I disagree with him. See, it's not about regulation. It's about breaking up these enormous companies. Google isn't one company. Google is a conglomeration of purchasing smaller tech companies and bringing them into the fold, essentially stealing the technology, and if they don't like the people in charge, those people who worked with that startup or that company get moved into a special place in the company where they're not allowed to have any say, they're not allowed to do anything, they have to come to work from 9 to 5, but they're seated outside with a pack of beer and paid to not work on the products that they love the most. And while that may sound wonderful to some, let me tell you, when your passion is developing applications, especially within a specific field or subset of fields, having your baby taken away from you like that by Google is absolutely devastating. And this is something that Google has a long track record of doing. Instead of firing people that they disagree with, they will push them out into a portion of the company So sorry about the background noise, everyone. They will push them out into a place where they have to come to work. They're contractually obligated to come into work, but they're also unable to actually do any work because they're locked out of systems, they're not allowed into specific buildings, and they essentially have to sit at work separated from the work that got them there in the first place. Soros is the latest high-profile business person to speak about the internet problems at Davos. Earlier this week, Salesforce chief executive Mark Beinoff said that Facebook should be regulated like a cigarette company because it's addictive and harmful. Of course, this is all coming out quite a lot, and this story is something else that is continuing to evolve. I really hope in the next few weeks we start seeing people actually actively discussing what can be done to break up the antitrust that is developed within Google, within Facebook, and even within Twitter, even if Twitter is a lot smaller of a fish in relationship to government influence. But there's also the article, this article, as well as these articles are also down below in the description box if you'd like to read them further. I'm going to skip the last story I was going to discuss today, so you can read that on your own, but the last story I'm going to discuss today is going to be about who is being described as Finland's Marine Pen. Now, Laura Huhtasaari, a Finnish populist with strong opinions against immigration and a history of teaching, has blown other candidates out of the water with her campaign for presidency in Finland this week. She adopted a Finland First policy which is described as echoing Donald Trump's politics, and she's also described as a Eurosceptic, which mostly means she's against the interference and meddling of the EU within the politics at the national scale. She claims that the EU has turned Finland into its province and challenges the political elite in Finland, which do not represent the average person in Finland. Much like Marine LePen, who showed an equal meteoric rise in political support in the first-round elections, it's unfortunately somewhat unlikely that Huhtasaari will be able to secure the presidency. However, by moving so many votes into her party, the Finns party, she will undoubtedly shake up politics in Finland, the way LePen had in France. With the rapid support she's developed, she joins other populist party leaders in Europe in challenging the growing hegemony and control the EU holds over its constituent nations. Her charisma and political outsider status make her very popular at speeches, where she often ends her speeches by going directly into crowds to shake hands and hug citizens she hopes to protect, in stark contrast both to the fiery nature of her speeches and the very hands-off nature of the incumbent president, Sauli Niinistö, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, and while the incumbent president is polling at 63% compared to Huhtasaari's 27%, polls are also expected to show the race tightening tonight and tomorrow when the election takes place. Now let's go straight to the article. Of the 8 contenders to be Finland's next president, none stand out like Laura Huhtasaari. The candidate of the far-right Finns party is an outlier both in style and substance. She won't win Sunday's presidential election. That's not a fair prediction right now. I mean, it's safe to say she will come in second, but if she breaks 30% by tomorrow, they're going to have a second election. So she doesn't actually have to win in the Finnish elections in order to shake up politics grandly for Finland. But she's using her time in the spotlight to push her party's anti-immigrant, anti-establishment message. She hates the European Union, cheered Brexit, and supports Donald Trump, and believes Finland is more than ready for her brand of populism. Huhtasaari, 38, is in her element on the campaign trail, speaking in downtown Helsinki to a devoted crowd that braved the height of winter to hear her speak. She rolled out of the greatest hits of her populist platform, ranting against a heavy-handed European Union that has turned Finland into its province, an out-of-touch Finnish political elite indifferent to the working class, and the perils of large-scale, mainly Muslim, immigration. She broke up her speech by going off-script and engaging with the crowd, shaking hands and offsetting her fiery rhetoric with a smile before telling her supporters to take the country back, and ending the 30-minute gathering with her rally cry of choice, Finland first. I think it's absolutely amazing that she's taken this up, because this is something that I've been talking about for a couple weeks now, and especially in the last week. Every nation needs to put their nation first. And Donald Trump has set an amazing precedent with America first, because it's not about America first, America only. He wants to see Germany put Germany first. He wants to see France put France first. He wants to see Finland put Finland first. I'm here to remind people that the Finns party is truly an alternative to the mainstream, Huhtasaari told Politico in an interview. I want to change the direction of Finland and take back our independence. Her strong comments about immigration, immigrants, and homosexuality have broken the mold of Finland's traditionally staid politics, and her silver blonde hair and bombastic speeches have earned Huhtasaari the moniker of Finland's Marine Le Pen in the local press. But unlike Le Pen, Huhtasaari's this is not unlike Le Pen, unfortunately. I don't know why they put it like this. Huhtasaari's odds of winning the presidency are a long shot. President Sauli Niinistu is extremely popular, and polls from the state broadcaster YLE show him garnering 63% of the votes. Huhtasaari is at 6% according to a recent poll. However, I've seen independent polls disconnected from the state putting her at 27%, which blows out both the Green League and independent candidates. And while the race is set to tighten in the days before the vote, the main tension has been whether Niinistu will win the first round of voting on Sunday or be forced into a runoff on February 11th. However, Huhtasaari has not let her candidacy go to waste. The inexperienced politician, she's only been in parliament for 3 years, has used the national platform to prime the Finns party base ahead of parliamentary and European elections in 2019, and regain momentum following its removal from the coalition government last summer. Skipping ahead a bit, making Finland great again. Huhtasaari's style is a patchwork of other anti-immigrant populist politicians, borrowing Le Pen's merging of tough nationalism and motherhood, adopting former UK Independence Party leader Nigel Farage's Euroscepticism, and remixing Trump's slogans to local versions. Finland first, let's take Finland back. Even the American president's iconic baseball cap has been seen reinterpreted with as a purple beanie with Laura written on the side. She's circulating the rhetoric of many other populist leaders, said Tuija Saresma, an expert on right-wing populism at the University of I Can't Even Fucking Say That. It doesn't matter if what she says is true or not. Her supporters still stand by her. This is a new phenomenon for Finland, and a phenomenon I'm very proud to see, because this is a slow but growing pattern that I've been watching happen for quite some time. I'm extremely proud to know that Europe has more populist leaders like Marine Le Pen, like the Dutch woman who ran last year. I can't remember her name offhand, but had a very similar populist platform to Marine Le Pen. And Miss Huhtasaari's platform for the Finns party and Finland first, I suspect we're going to be seeing this more and more. Don't be surprised if we see a Poland first party. Don't be surprised if we see a Hungary and Romania first party showing up in the next 2-3 years. And don't be surprised if the EU is forced into a very difficult position when more of these populists begin entering the EU Parliament and speaking a language very similar to Korwin-Mikke of Poland, actively condemning the collectivist and very dangerous policies that the EU has adopted, especially in the last 15 years. That said, she's been begging me to get on... Oh, wait, I gotta read some stuff. Egregious Charles says, if some politician says their nation is first, I suspect they're lying and they personally are first. If they don't say their nation is first, then I'm certain of it. That's a very healthy skepticism to have. But at the same time, Europe is plagued by collectivism that is dismissing the working class, especially in Eastern Europe. So seeing these movements, these populist movements, even if some of them are in a position where they might be promoting something dangerous to the country, or I say dangerous, that's not really the right word, doing something that might not be the most popular, it's important to recognize that these populist groups are responding to the working class of their nations. The only reason that this woman has what is distinctly broad, but between 6 and 27% votes, is because people agree with her, and people need to feel like they're actually being considered, especially because Finland is a nation very much influenced by Russia, and very much influenced by the EU at the same time. And the politicians in Finland have just about thrown away their working class, much in the same way that Sweden has thrown away its working class at this point, in exchange for immigrants. But in the case of Finland, they've just thrown it away for the sake of being part of the cool kids club in Europe. And, I mean, you don't have to agree with her, but it sets the stage in Europe for populist parties to fight against collectivist groups pushing their agenda from the EU in nations that need a little bit more nationalist strength. And at this point, I don't know, if you're still there, Red Frog, I'd love to drag you into the chat, because I'd love to hear what you had to say. I know it's been like, fuck, an hour and a half for you. Oh, quiet, LT. Show your manners. He lives here. Quit growling at him. I think Red Frog might have already gone to sleep. It is, of course, what, almost 3 a.m. in Europe? And that being the case, I'm just going to bring the show to a close because I am sweating like fuck right now. It is so fucking hot in here. Our air conditioner is still busted, and unfortunately the fans make so much noise that I have to turn them off in order to do... Oh, you are still here. Wonderful. I'm going to pull you into the show then and see what you had to say, because I do love chatnets. Oh, I love you so much, sweetheart. Now let's see if we can do this. Let's see if this works. Ways that I have to turn them off in order to do... Oh, you are still here.
Since
Wonderful.
when does the devil sleep?
Pull you into yourself, sweetheart. Mute the stream, sweetheart.
Love chatnets.
I can hear... I'm hearing the background audio from my stream.
How's that?
Better, thank you. So,
Since when does the devil sleep?
well, with Hope, whenever I put her to sleep. So what did you want to add to the conversation? Because I love your opinions. I know I'm very,
You know what, Diane, is I am too with my opinions to the articles you mentioned, and it's like one after the other. The most recent one is when you talk about the workload, and the thing is that in Europe, most people don't notice this fact. The amount of taxes that are added upon work givers, producers, employers. You're dealing with the fact where an employer actually has to pay to the government a similar amount he actually pays to the worker himself for working a full 40-hour work week. So you're literally dealing with the fact that you have to pay a worker for 40 or 40 hours a week works of that is like 2 grand, another 2 you have to pay to the government with taxes. How does a employer deal with that? He has to double his pay towards the taxes he has to give in.
That is actually absolutely horrible, and on top of the fact that, like, there's a lot of corruption in the way the EU handles interstate trade, it creates a position where a lot of these businesses are basically paying out of the ass from the poorest countries, and some of the richer countries are benefiting off of these poorer countries.
They are, and this is the thing, the EU, they do not have an equal, as it were, club fee. You're paying applied to your economic value. Therefore, the most rich countries with the best value end up paying the most into the EU budget. And they end up supporting the weakest ones of all of them. However, the mediocre countries on their own, they end up in the goddamn slaughterhouse because they're above the medium where they get to get financing. However, they're not high enough to have anything left for themselves. So you're literally dealing with a situation where a typical person that has, I don't know, hairstyle salon, and for every hairstylist he hires, he needs to dish out 4 grand of equivalents of euros just to pay them because they have minimum wage in the EU, and then a second half of it with country taxes. And please enjoy.
It's a serious problem, and it's something no one seems to like to talk about within the EU, is the fact that they are just companies are having to pay hand over fist to the state and the EU in a manner that puts the EU at such an extreme disadvantage, especially if your country has resources or any sort of wealth. And countries like Italy, for example, who kind of fall in the very middle financially, are able to exploit that by taking advantage of Eastern European countries, making sales in Eastern Europe and smuggling their goods into Eastern Europe, paying as little as possible, while the people who are trying to make a living in Eastern Europe are having to pay out the ass in taxes, in fees, just to sell their,
I mean, I'm just gonna give you the millionaire's question. What's the cheapest pack of cigarettes worth in Eastern Europe, universally, no matter what brand or state you're in?
I wouldn't know.
$5 equivalent, or you calculate to euro and dollars.
Well, considering the standard of living
The standard of living is $500 a month.
Right, that's absolutely insane.
Welcome to fucking Eastern Europe. I'm proving it right now. I can't light a lighter and I'm out of fucking matches. Sweet irony and visual credit points. Someone's gonna have a laugh out of this. I have an actual lighter in my bag. I just don't want to go like on your show. I'll get it eventually.
No worries. I did want to ask what you think of the growing populist movements across Europe.
Well, bloody finally, all I have to say. I don't like the socialist part to them because Europe has a very specific way to it. Europe has a stinky way to it, honestly, because if you look at the American Revolution, right, it was defiance against the hegemony of royalty that pretty much choked the country up to stamp taxes and tea taxes. In Russia, on contrary, it was a defiance against the Tsar, who was so incompetent he could not rule by himself. The country was ruled by his wife and her lover. In the middle of the timeline, you had France, which was destroyed by the French goddamn aristocracy, and we're gonna ignore the French. The only thing they're good at is making perfume. Let's ignore these guys. It's not the only thing they can do. So you're literally dealing with, you get rid of the French, you're dealing with two libertarian empires that want their freedom, that want to just work for themselves. They want to forge their own life and fate, right?
Mm-hmm.
In one case, they go to a bloody war defying the biggest empire in human history, right?
Yeah.
The British Empire.
The
And yes. In the second case, they go against the Tsar's tyranny and all he had to back up in the middle of the First World War. And they're willing to give up to Lenin, who's basically the only guy with his background that says, like, fuck you, I'm still alive, I'm gonna keep fighting. So they just like, you're an alternative. We're gonna give up, we're gonna go with you. Because there's no one else. As sucky as he was the only fucking alternative. There was the breakup between the Bolsheviks and Mensheviks later. But at the moment where the October Revolution happened, he was the only thing really going on. Who was brave enough to say, fuck you, we're gonna fucking fight to the blood. And he did that. And you're dealing with a country that was so fed up, they executed the Tsar, the king of their country, and the moment they ran out of bullets, they beat the shit out of his children with goddamn stocks of their rifles, because there was no other option. And why the reason I'm bringing this up, because it may sound pretty old, but the problem is that in many current European countries, they have gone back to that same exploitation ideal. You pay the minimum wage which the country sets. You're dealing with money that cannot sustain you throughout a month. You're starving at the end of the month. The rest goes to taxes. How fed up are people if they cannot withstand a whole work week? They cannot withstand additional work. They're physically unable to do it. Everything goes to the taxes in the country, and they better have enough to buy fucking ramen noodles. I'm not talking about fancy food. I'm literally talking about ramen noodles and a half-pound bag of rice to sustain you to what's between you and the first of the next month where you get your money. And the boss actually manages to threaten you. You know what? If you're not going to do additional work, I'm going to fire you. And you're not going to get any more money. This is Europeanism. He gets to preach to you work ethics when you do above 8 hours of work a day. And then cut your paycheck and report you. And you have no choice. You either agree to this type of Chinese, essentially Chinese ethics, or you have nothing to live on. Because, see, this is the thing, it's talked about the European welfare state. Unless you actually have the right things to apply for it, like you're missing an arm, or you have the right type of sugar deficiency. I'm sorry, help me out here. I've lost the word. What's English for sugar problems? There are A type and B types.
Diabetes.
Diabetes, I'm sorry. Yes, unless you have the right type of diabetes, forget about public money. And best lose a leg to it, because otherwise still forget about it.
This is where Europe has ended up, though. It's kind of gone full circle. Because they're only making things worse with an immigration policy which essentially forgets about the people who need it the most in Europe in order to bring in people who no doubt need help, but taking them out of their homes, their cultures, and attempting to supplant that culture in Europe has only proven to destabilize Europe more.
And we're dealing with the fact where the people that come in, they take advantage of the welfare state while never paying into it.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I am sweating my fucking cunt off, and I need to take a short break, and I'm going to bring the show to a close. and then you and me can rant some more if you'd like, Red Frog.
Yes, see, this is the thing. If you want Sevi to get more views and you want me to come back up, tell her you like me and boost up those views. Otherwise, I'm doing a disappearing act and I'm the goddamn Aladdin genie. Enjoy.
Thank you all so very much for coming out today, and I'm sorry for starting late, but it has been an absolutely wonderful show, and I will see you next week. Bonsoir.
Do swidania.